Welcome to the podcast, Tara. I am so excited to talk to you today. I want to say this is an unconventional episode, but at the same time, I feel like we definitely go in some different paths. Even the podcast itself is following non-conventional ways to build your life. And so within that, we need to go into the micro. We need to study some things that are going to help us in our endeavors to grow businesses. You come with this incredible background. I'm going to let you kind of give a little introduction into yourself and even your passion for this and where that derived from. But thank you for being here today and talking about something that's a little off the beaten path for us.
Absolutely. It is a pleasure for me to be here. And I'm so intrigued, as we have touched on very gently, what is the intersection between the pursuit of an entrepreneurial success and path and my background, which, as you say, is in cognitive science and in education. And I think I spent many years in education. And for a long time, I recognized or I relied on tools and strategies that were external to support my students. And I think most of us lived in that system, in that structure, the assumption that we can't change within us. We can't change our core ability to learn and to perform. So let's rely on external tools and strategies to do so. And it wasn't until I came across about halfway through my career, almost 20 years ago now, that in fact, we can change within. We can change the very asset that has been with us since birth and has been shaping how it is we navigate the world, our brains. We can directly shape and improve our brain's capacity to learn and perform. And with that, learning, and when I say learning, I don't just mean in school, but of course in life and throughout our lifespan, we can actually directly target and improve our brain's ability to navigate the world. So I think that you're right. There is really interesting intersection between an entrepreneurial's mindset to innovate, to build, and even to push boundaries. And what it is I do in my work, and really what I believe I am part of a movement, a growing movement that really understands not just education differently, but human potential differently. So happy to be here and explore that together.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating to me. I told you in the work that I do outside of even Millionaire University, and even as a business coach, I think there has to be this initial hurdle that we jump over. And I'm really excited to get your take on how we navigate with different learning disabilities or learning labels that we have with ADHD, dyslexia, things like that, which are very real. And also, like, I think sometimes we can say, oh, well, that's just how it is. And I don't have the ability to really change. You know, you can't teach an old dog new tricks is very much the adage that we have followed for far too long. And it's really quite recent, right? That we've even recognized that the brain is elastic, that it can be changed, that it can be altered, and that we can continue to progress. So what is that like historical approach, and how is that impacting even, or how can it impact an entrepreneur's approach to business and the things you think you're capable of? Just kind of give us a little science lesson and what our brain really can do versus what we think it can do.
Happy to. And if you'll indulge me, I'm going to give a history lesson, a science lesson.
Love it.
Because you mentioned that that systemic assumption, that for hundreds and hundreds of years, we believed our brain to be fixed. We believed, and when I say we, I mean, the royal we, society, humans, scientists, the most important thinkers of our day. For hundreds of years, it was believed that the brain was fixed, that it was kind of like this empty box. You pour information or knowledge into it or not, depending on that box's capacity. And there was really nothing that you could do to change or improve it unless it was unchangeable, unless, of course, there was injury, and then you're really in trouble because there's no coming back from that. So not only did science believe that the brain is fixed and therefore we have a predetermined capacity to learn, to perform, that was determined really at birth, but all of our systems were built on that premise. So if you can just appreciate every single aspect of, again, human, of society, of school systems and professional systems, workplaces are built on this idea that, okay, that person can, and that person can't. And this
Mm,
person is somewhere in between.
yeah.
And our education systems, particularly, given this is my background, this is where you mentioned passion, this is where I'm most
Mm-hmm.
passionate. Our education systems, all of the ones, frankly, my guess is that your listeners went through, were built on this premise
Mm-hmm.
that learners are identified at a very early age of either capable or less capable or not capable. And that system was perpetuated, is still perpetuated by all the different ways that we navigate school, all the different ways we're taught, we learn, all the different ways we're evaluated and assessed, all the different ways we are put onto paths, certain career paths, certain academic and career paths, certain social paths, certain psychological paths of how we see ourselves and how others define us, is all built on this system, this
Mm.
fixed brain concept. Never mind fixed mindset, which, as you described, that's certainly a manifestation of this fixed brain.
Yeah.
So that the history is that our entire educational and social mechanisms were built on this idea that we have to give our schools, we have to build workers, right? For the Industrial Revolution, we have to build workers and we have to build leaders, but they're predetermined. At a very early age, we know who the workers are, we know who the leaders are, and we even know who underneath those workers, who are going to be reliant on community and systems, social systems for the rest of their lives. In other words, who's incapable of learning and have to be cared for the rest of their lives. The science, though, has evolved. The systems aren't there yet, but the science has
Yeah.
evolved. Science now tells us very clearly, and has done for decades, and this is where we recognize it really takes time for systems to change, because the
Mm-hmm.
science very clearly tells us the brain, as you say, is plastic. The brain absolutely changes and modifies and grows uh, with throughout life. And it is not a fixed brain. It is a very, very adaptable brain. Neuroplasticity is a key phrase for your audience to keep in mind. Neuroplasticity is the scientific fact that the brain is adaptable, modifiable, and changeable. Now, neuroplasticity, by the way, is a neutral concept. It can be for good or
Mm-hmm.
it can be negatively neuroplastic. Think about addiction. Think
Mm.
about uh, OCD. Think about negative, and in your work, absolutely negative thought patterns that aren't serving us, that tend to be wired so consistently that it leads to maladaptive or unproductive thought patterns or even behaviors. Neuroplasticity can also be harnessed for good. And that's
Mm.
certainly where our work is, and where really will be, I believe, the critical scientific fact that can and should change systematically and systemically the education system, the professional system, and really how it is we see ourselves as being capable and having potential uh, to lead our world, lead our
Mm-hmm.
lives, and do good in the world.
I love that. And I think I'm grateful for the history and the science lesson. I think we needed that foundation as we dive into how this really applies to our listeners and us. And I think it's crazy that we went on so long, but can't you say that of so many things we look back and we're like, we believed that for that long and that's how we function for hundreds or thousands of years. And I think that it's really good awareness on a societal level, but then even bringing it to a personal level, that even though we understand the science, even though we can have a little bit of that deep dive, there does need to be a period of patience and growth where the systems can catch up. So And I've seen this in my own life play out as an entrepreneur. You have these changes that start to happen. And even in the coaching I do, like you have these aha moments, right? You recognize, oh my gosh, this is why I've been doing this. This is what's contributed to this behavior. And then you create this new vision and this new ideal of what you want to become. And there's always inevitably this dipping point because you're going to keep running into the old patterning that's been formed. And I want to talk about neural pathways with you. And it
Mm,
takes time, first of all, just to change the externals that are going to make it possible to do that changing. And so I love that. I love that perspective that the system has to catch up with the science and it's going to take some time. So when, as an entrepreneur, like for me individually, as I'm looking at maybe some of the things that I'm doing, can you
mhm,
explain to me, because we talked about how this can be for negative, that this is
mm.
more than just like change your mindset, just go think more positively and what might be scientifically blocking that capacity. If you've had years of either trauma or years of believing something, it literally creates, so maybe it's a neural pathway conversation. Just kind of give us the sciencey and realistic answer for that.
Yeah, I can. And though you're also reminding me that I didn't go far enough back in history
Okay.
because our brains were designed to protect ourselves, right? They were designed to protect ourselves from, I don't know, woolly mammoths, from from death.
Yeah.
So our brains are designed to avoid risk and to avoid danger. And
Mhm.
you can see really quickly how that has built uh, into our human growth, into our systems, really, and to our mindset. So
Mhm.
it makes perfect sense that we avoid hard, that we avoid risk, that we avoid fears. Now, ironically, talk about the entrepreneurial brain. That tends to be very much what entrepreneurs pursue and even are attracted to. I have a bit of a theory that there's actually a relationship between a certain cognitive or brain profile and an entrepreneurial brain. In
Yeah.
other words, I think that there's a tendency for those who pursue entrepreneurial fields uh, have had frustrations or have felt limitations in traditional or conventional academic and even professional settings
Mm.
because of a certain cognitive profile, and they've pursued that path. So let's talk a little bit about the science behind what is even an entrepreneurial brain, but in general, our brains are very, very complex. I certainly don't have to teach anyone that it is filled with, it's only 3 pounds, but it's considered, the most complex organ rather that is within us. Some scientists, of course, who are obsessed with the brain, neuroscientists particularly, really see this as really one of the most complex aspects of human life as we know it, because so much, frankly, is misunderstood about it or is not yet understood about it. But in the
Mhm.
last few decades, we've increased our understanding of what is our brains, how do they operate, how do they shape our lives, and of course, how can we change or improve our brains through neuroplasticity. But really at a core, let's think of the brain as a series of highways and connections, what we call cognitive functions. So cognitive functions are specific parts of our brain or specific processes or networks in our brain. And each cognitive function plays a really, really specific role in in a task completion. Lots of analogies we could use. The one I love is an orchestra. Why? Because an orchestra is made up of a group of musicians that each play a different instrument. And each instrument is critical for a given piece of music. Not all instruments are played upon or played depending on the piece of music. So if the piece of music is a simple task like, I don't know, scratching our nose, a complicated task like generating a budget or coming up with a business plan for your entrepreneurial pursuit, will be a more complex task. It will use more instruments, more complex instruments, and the instruments will be asked to play very complex pieces of, produce very complex pieces of sound. So anything we do requires these cognitive functions to work or play together, to be active, to be effective, and play together to complete that task. So something like listening to our chat right now, your audience, their brains are active. They are fired up. There are different cognitive functions. There's a cognitive function that's paying attention to what we're saying, we're sharing. There's a cognitive function that's understanding the individual words of what we're saying and how they relate to each other. There's a cognitive function that's remembering what we've said at the beginning of our chat to connect it with what we're currently saying. There's a cognitive function that's inhibiting the distractions that might be around us. And, these days, the distraction is it's a very real danger that we're facing. So all of these cognitive functions right now, just in this conversation, are being lit up and asked to participate. We all have a unique cognitive profile. We all have a unique makeup of these cognitive functions and the degree to which they're functioning. Because it's not like an on-off switch. It's not binary per cognitive function. Each cognitive function, think of it as operating on a spectrum, on a continuum, from very, very strong to very, very weak, and all those stages in between in terms of capacity. So you can imagine there's many, many cognitive functions, and each of us have this unique makeup of cognitive functions, each one operating on a certain level of functionality. Our unique cognitive brains, our unique cognitive profiles, probably more different than our fingerprints, right? Like that's the degree of unique combinations of strengths and weaknesses. That cognitive profile is what determines every single action and reaction in life. So I think if there's like a key takeaway to start with, is that unique cognitive profile that all of us walk around with, this gorgeous, complex little 3-pound organ within our skulls that is as unique as our fingerprints, as unique as, I'm in Toronto, we've just had a massive snowfall, so snow is on the mind, as unique as a snowflake, and shapes how we act and react in the world. It shapes how we understand ourselves and others. It determines how others understand us. And it's an incredibly important insight to have, because we tend to misunderstand and misinterpret ourselves and others without using this, what we call a cognitive lens. If we use a cognitive lens to understand ourselves and to understand others, we build a level of understanding and a level of compassion and a level of opportunity for growth that I think is critical.
Yeah. Ooh, I love that. I love that so much. And I told you I geek out over the science of this. And even though I barely scratched the surface, I'm tracking everything you're saying. And I love that you went there at the very end too, that we have to look at ourselves and others through this lens. And I think a lot of times we don't, right? And we're still operating on that system of, well, it's supposed to be this way. And if it's not that way, then you're dumb or you're incapable, incompetent. You're behind, you don't have what it takes. All of those belief systems that come because we fail to put the lens there. And I just think about, I have a photography background, and it changes the whole spectrum of the photo when you can put these different colored lenses. It changes the photo entirely, right? I don't know if you watch the TV show Severance, but if you look at the raw film, they're recording in a very warm lit room because they know they're going to put these filters on. I know this is kind of like going on a tangent, but I think
it's beautiful.
It changes, right? It changes entirely. I'm sure maybe you haven't watched Severance, but with your
I
background.
watched the first season. I don't know whether should I watch this first season again to like really beautifully move into the second season. These are important questions that I ask myself.
I know, very important. Well, it depends on how long it's been, because I waited almost 3 years and I was like, I don't even remember some of these characters. I just know I was excited. Anyway, so with that being said, these filters literally give us the ability to have compassion for ourselves. And it, even in and of itself, having that understanding, it kind of reminds me of the work that I do, I help people regulate their nervous system, understand that they're in fight or flight response when they don't even realize they are.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
simple recognition in and of itself, even if you don't go into this deep process of regulating it and honoring it, just understanding that's what's happening can change the game for you. So I think this understanding of putting that lens in place so that you're seeing a clearer picture, you're seeing the picture the way it's actually intended, and you take these labels away of right or wrong, smart or dumb, whatever the case may be, it creates this whole new playground for growth. And it creates more opportunity than I think existed before, because we're not, we're pulling away from that external and we're really understanding, okay, so how do I function? What is my cognitive ability? What are my experiences? What's my background? Don't put that aside on a shelf and say, well, that really has nothing to do with it, because
Yeah.
if she can do it, I should be able to do it. And if I'm not able to do it, there's something wrong with me and I'm dumb, which then I would imagine continues to feed in to that cognitive pathway, that cognitive belief system that you are dumb. You are
Oh,
incapable.
it's absolutely massive. I mean, in the educational space, it's called learned helplessness, but for
Mm,
sure, there are very real, neuroplastic pathways, neuro pathways being built with those negative thoughts, and I also was really I thought about this and whether or not it would come up, and it feels like it has, because there's a really interesting trend right now, movement right now, where people, and it's coming from I think, the self-awareness space.
mhm,
Uh, but this idea that we're owning our weaknesses or our flaws or our qualities of us. And as you say, kind of putting them on the shelf, but also being somewhat passive or complacent. But, well, that's just me. And you just kind of have
mm,
to like love it or lump it. Or it's being co opted a little more positively, although I'm in two minds about this, that like this is my superpower, right? The
mm,
fact that I have ADHD, for example, like that's my superpower. And I'm a little uncomfortable with that, because I think it's ultimately that's a fixed mindset. That's a fixed
mhm.
brain and a fixed mindset, because you're not recognizing that it's possible to change or improve. And I would argue that as much as someone, for example, with ADHD probably also has, or absolutely will have other strengths of creativity, strengths of perseverance, but there's still a cost to
Yeah.
that weak attention piece.
Mhm.
And I understand if if neuroplasticity or positive neuroplasticity wasn't possible, then of course we have to, we have to dig deep and find the positive and optimistic view.
Mhm.
But we don't have to do that. We don't have to only do that. We
Yeah.
absolutely can adapt cognitively and adapt psychologically to challenges, and not just, as you say, kind of put them on the shelf and say, well, that's just me. So it's either going to break me, or or even I'm going to celebrate it,
Mhm.
celebrate it. But yeah, I'm I want to push back a little bit, to that
Yeah.
idea that the self-awareness, when we see shortcomings in ourselves or even genuine cognitive deficits in ourselves, that we say that that's what makes us special. That's what makes us great. It's what makes
Mm.
us unique, makes us ourselves. Absolutely. And it's a starting point. It's where we are right now. So how are we going to grow and learn and uh, uh, move forward from that?
Oh my gosh. I'm over here just like, yes, yes, I'm so happy we went here, because I've been conflicted in that too, where
Yeah.
I even hired a coach, and no shame or hate to this at all. I think I was in such a place that the marketing was so on point that you feel seen. This is good marketing, right?
Mhm.
If you can connect with my symptoms and what I'm experiencing on a day-to-day basis, then obviously that's my problem. And I kind of went into this whole I spent probably a couple years being like, yeah, I totally have ADHD and that's why this and this and this. And
Mhm.
I'll try to make a long story short, but I think as I went through more of the emotional intelligence coaching and some of the things that I've started to learn, I'm understanding what changed about who I am just because we put this label on the behaviors that I had. Like, and then how does that limit me? And how does that make me now I identify as this thing? Now this is part of who I am.
Mhm.
And so, how do I change when I'm continuing to identify with something that, yes, it can be my superpower? Why can I not have my superpower of my creativity that exists independent of this title or this label?
Absolutely.
And I'm so passionate about that. And I understand. And it's actually really touchy. I wanted to make a little more content about this. And even the very first time I talked about any semblance of you actually have the ability to work with this and not use it as an excuse and feel like you're a victim of your ADHD, there was a lot of
Mhm.
pushback because there's so
Mhm.
much, like
Mhm.
you said, it really is this fixed mindset, this fixed
Mhm.
brain. Well, because I'm this way, I can't change.
Mhm.
And so I'm so happy that you went there. And even as I initially was like reading your information about what you do, and I know you mentioned you talk about dyslexia and ADHD,
Mhm.
my fear was honestly, oh, are we gonna like kind of go into the realm of when you have this, like we're just gonna, this is just who you are. And I love hearing
Mhm.
that it's kind of more, we're kind of in sync with this of understanding. Let's not treat it like a block. Let's recognize it. I'm curious your opinion. You have more science background than I have. I just have a theory. Like you said, I have a theory about cognitive profiles with entrepreneurs, and I want to dive into that
Mhm.
eventually too. My theory is that ADHD is the result of it's a lot of patterning, right? It's a lot of creating of those neural pathways based on experience. Could be trauma. I recognized a lot of my ADHD symptoms happened after severe trauma
Mhm.
experiences. And
Mhm.
even the world I live in, the overabundance of stimuli and all of the things that I'm trying to do. So what is your take on that? And then even just if you want to continue to echo back what we were talking about with this fixed mindset versus your capacity to not rely on this as the title.
Yeah, I love, um, so glad we're chatting today. There really is. Uh, so I let's agree that both are powerful, right? That
Mhm.
that the awareness of, and I I'm uncomfortable with labels for lots of reasons because I think there's often mislabeling. But
Mhm.
many labels, particularly diagnoses, are critical in our current system and our
Mm.
current, it's certainly in the educational system, until or unless schools, and this is my work and my goal and our vision as an organization, that all schools have neuroplastic programming built into the school day. It's
Mm.
happening in schools all over the world. It is very possible. It is it's an absolutely investment. It is not easy, so we can talk about what that actually looks like. But if I just reinforce that, until or unless that's happening, that there's neuroplastic, what we call cognitive programs built into the school day, built into corporate settings, built into HR programs, built into the health system, healthcare. Like there's all kinds of ways that that can happen. But until that happens, if someone has a learning disability, a diagnosed learning disability, and they need extra time or resources to manage, they need that and they deserve
Mhm.
that. And that is their human right to have that diagnosis protect them from being misunderstood or
Mm.
to be limited in their path. So uh, labels in and of themselves aren't damaging or dangerous unless they're damaging or dangerous.
Right. I know it's
Unless,
such a
as
nuanced
you
thing.
say, yeah, unless, as you say, they are improperly named or improperly co-opt, or that they limit, at the very least, they limit someone's personal growth. They can also be, the research shows that it can be, really quite dangerous they can create biases. So teachers and even employers look at an individual with a diagnosis and they're not hired or they're not given opportunities in school or in the workplace, or the limits are put upon them even before they
They show their
express that they are.
superpower.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I feel like that's almost another podcast, but but
Yeah.
but let's talk about ADHD or attention issues because it certainly something that's become more and more common.
Yeah.
And there's certainly, absolutely, it starts in the brain. Our
Mhm.
brains regulate our attention. Our brains regulate our focus and determine the degree to which we engage with the world. So our capacity to regulate attention is probably the most important uh, determinant in our
Mhm.
success in school and in life. Um, it's technically it's not defined as a learning disability according to um, DSM-5, but there's no doubt ADHD and attention issues profoundly impact uh, who we are.
Mhm.
And so whether it's diagnosed or not, so I want to kind of bring into bring into the fold all of us who at some point or another have seen a pattern, a sustained pattern or increased frequency. And this is happening with our digital space and with our smartphones and with this new, relatively new, uh, somewhat terrifying world of on demand, whenever I want, short content. Like, absolutely. This is also another podcast.
Yeah.
We are probably all wiring our brains to have shorter attention spans. There's no
Mhm.
question that's happening. But any of us who recognize some tendencies of getting easily sidetracked, of being disorganized, forgetful, losing things, struggling to follow through, procrastination, avoiding, uh, those are attention issues that are absolutely starting in the brain. In our experience and in our work, there are two critical cognitive functions. Remember that term, cognitive function. So these are these networks or regions of the brain that are responsible for really specific tasks. So right at the front of our brains, I'm not sure if there's video here, but I'm pointing at at my forehead here. So in our left and our right hemisphere, there are two cognitive functions: symbolic thinking in our left hemisphere, nonverbal thinking in our right hemisphere. And it's our prefrontal cortex. Okay. So think of our prefrontal cortex. Often it's referred to like the CEO of our brains. They
Mhm.
regulate, they light up whenever they're faced with something, they're the first to light up and they regulate our the rest of our brains. They regulate
Mhm.
our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors. They are constantly active. And these two cognitive functions are therefore essential in every moment of our conscious being. And remember, I talked about the degree of capacity or how well a given cognitive function is operating.
Yeah.
So the degree to which those two cognitive functions are operating determines how we attend to our world. So if they're not doing their jobs, if they are weak, even mildly so, attention, whether it's formally diagnosed as ADHD or formally ADD, whether that's formally diagnosed, it's very likely that these two cognitive functions are weak to some degree.
Hmm.
Okay. And so if one or both of them are weak, it's going to impact our mental initiative, our ability to stay on topic, our direction, our goal setting, our independence, our execution, and particularly in the right hemisphere. So right hemisphere is nonverbal. So right hemisphere is, dare I say, common sense. The reason I say
Hmm.
common sense is it implies that it's, we all have it, but it's a cognitive function. So the
Hmm.
degree to which we navigate our nonverbal world, the degree to which we perceive and pick up on the cues and clues in our nonverbal world is determined through this cognitive function. So, how we can read the room, the degree to which we can come up with a plan B very quickly in a conversation because we're getting a read from the other person that what we're saying isn't quite
Hmm.
gelling. So huge in the entrepreneurial space, right? Where
Yeah.
collaboration and partnership and even selling is particularly critical. Our nonverbal thinking function better be pretty on task and on target to be constantly coming up with new ideas or new possibilities or new paths to our goal, to our intention. So when we talk about attention, when we talk about ADHD, keep in mind that these are two cognitive functions in our prefrontal cortex that absolutely shape our ability to attend to the world. There's
Mm.
also in our work what we call a cognitive load. So that's when multiple cognitive functions, maybe those two in our prefrontal cortex, but maybe a different cognitive function that's responsible for processing and understanding. Maybe a different cognitive function that's responsible for our memory. Maybe even cognitive functions that are responsible for just kind of foundational skills like how to read and write or take notes. And if those cognitive functions are weak, imagine we stop paying attention. We
Mhm.
disengage with the experience at hand because it is cognitively taxing for us. It is literally exhausting to cope with a task if we have multiple cognitive functions that are underperforming or underplaying.
Mm.
So it may be specific cognitive functions in our prefrontal lobe, or it may be just the overwhelm of multiple cognitive functions that are underperforming to some degree. There's
Mm.
also neurochemical imbalance that of course, would be only directly supported through medication, right?
Mhm.
So, and it could be all three of those elements. It could be prefrontal weakness, it could be a cognitive load, and to some degree, there could be some neurochemistry. What we have found in our work, because we work with individuals and organizations to have cognitive programming built into their day that are improving specific prefrontal cortex areas or improving addressing that cognitive load piece, many do come in on medication
Mm.
and they stay on the medication during the course of their participation. But then after a certain period of time, they actually come off the medication. In other words, it was never a neurochemistry imbalance to begin with. It was a
Mm.
cognitive function imbalance. So
I
does
can
that
see how
help
that could
the
be
kind
very
of
cyclical. Yeah. Like you could it I could totally see, and I've even understood sometimes the medication is helpful just to address so that you can actually get to the root of what's really causing the symptoms, what's really causing the behavior. But that's so fascinating that a lot of times you said, like, quite often they didn't really have the chemical imbalance. It was just a matter of the other things that needed to be addressed. And you do
absolutely.
that work, you help them process. I love that you even mentioned earlier, like, this is happening. There are systems that are coming in. I love that your company and where you're at has a vision for trying to make this better, trying to fix the system. And I think it can feel like a really daunting task in the world that we live in that's moving so rapidly, kind of to continuing to support the wrong system, right? The system of,
Mhm.
like, well, first of all,
Fixed mindset.
we're making it worse on our attention spans and all the things. Like you said, it's a really scary thing. It can be so cool, but then it's also really frightening when you look at even my children. I look at their ability to that side of the brain that's I have a particular child who I'm like, how do you not know how
Mhm.
to read the room? And it's
Mhm.
kind of like distressing to hear that and recognize literally because there could be things that have caused that to not function as well as it could have because of the world he's living in and all of the stimuli and the way that he's processing and building those patterns in his brain. Oh man, this is
Can
a
we
lot.
can we chat about that? Because
Yeah.
uh, I want you to see the relationship
Mhm.
between those tendencies of missteps or misreading or missing altogether and an academic skill.
Mhm.
In other words, there's an academic skill of reading, let's say, okay? And how do we learn how to read? We have different regions of our brain, different functions of our brain. One is responsible for the visual memory of how a word looks. One is responsible for phonemic awareness so that we can hold on to the sound of the word. One is responsible for just our eyes tracking across the page so that we don't miss a word or miss a letter or miss our place in the word. One is to understand what it is, the definition of the word. A different is to understand what it is we're reading. So, a minimum of 5, probably close to 9 cognitive functions need to light up to read even just a simple phrase. Okay.
Wow.
And we have to have those cognitive functions relatively secure in order to acquire reading as a skill. Social skills are no different. We have to have the cognitive functions that are responsible for thinking before we speak. That's a cognitive function. As you say, reading the room or reading the body language or tone of voice or facial expressions, that's a different cognitive function. Paying attention to what it is our task, what's our role and responsibility in that engagement, that's a different cognitive function. Picking up on the nuances of language, like sarcasm, the difference between, sarcasm and anger, for example, that's a different cognitive function. It's no different than learning how to read until or unless we have the cognitive strengths to engage in our social world with not confidence, competence, ability. It's going to be a similar experience than having some difficulties learning and reading. Not impossible, but it's taking us more time. It's taking that child or that individual. I mean, literacy is a lifelong skill. If someone has difficulty reading, if it takes them more time or more energy, if they feel exhausted, if they have to read something out loud multiple times before it makes sense to them, those are manifestations of certain cognitive functions that are underneath reading. Think of it kind of like the iceberg, So there's these cognitive functions underneath reading as the skill, as the tip of the iceberg, but there's lots going on underneath that water. Same too with, even a young child. And this is what's fascinating about when we kind of observe, when we take this cognitive lens and we think, gosh, we just called that kid quirky or funny or rude or,
slow or like to
slow,
get a little,
exactly. Like all of these, and some very positive, sometimes like I think about, not sure I want him listening to this, but I think about my brother who has some of these deficits, also very bright. And he kind of relied on he developed a certain persona that got some positive feedback from. So he leaned into that persona. But underneath that persona are these very specific cognitive glitches. And same with just as reading or any other academic skill requires the brain, so do how we function in the world socially and interpersonally. And there are cognitive functions responsible for that. And there's those same cognitive functions can be strengthened, can be neuroplastically improved so that the skill is acquired with greater ease and even joy.
Oh, I love that. And okay, so before we even get into maybe a little bit of the how, because I know this is a huge task, not to make it sound hopeless, but it's a job, right? This isn't something you're going to take a course and you're instantly going to improve your neuroplasticity. You're going to change your neural pathways and you're just going to become a different person. But I think even before we get into that, and based on even what I just said, I'm sitting here ruminating as a parent on now that I understand that. And, I've also understood these are kids, and sometimes I have to remember they haven't lived as many years on this earth as I have. They literally don't have the experience and the knowledge in the brain. But I realize the damage that can be done as I say that to my son, like, you don't know how to read the room, you this and this and this, like, and then they start to compartmentalize and create this whole identity layer and they start functioning. And I look at myself, this is why people become like the funny one, because you lean into the strength so that you're not having to even rely on the weaknesses as much. So I think it's important to hear, of course, I'm saying this as a parent, but even as a person, an individual, being aware of these things and how you speak to yourself and you continue to affirm, which I think goes back to our conversation of the label. They exist for a reason. There's definite purpose to it. And I think when you limit yourself based on, well, I have ADHD, therefore I cannot because I am this person, then it totally inhibits the ability to change that. And so I think that's really where it has to start, is recognition of I do have the capacity to change. I do have the capacity to become stronger. My brain can literally build these functions. And I know I've been working on my health journey a little bit. And something I hear is like, it literally reprograms your brain when you do hard things. And I can see that on a very simple level, right? When I show myself I can go to the gym, I can resist sugar, I can do these things, every time I do it, it's creating new neural pathways, right? It's literally strengthening my cognitive ability to do that again and again and again. I love that there's this intersection in like what I do with the emotional, because it combines brain and what you do and what you understand. We're just such complex people. So with that being said, even just in maybe giving some very small takeaways, as much as we can, what, in addition to the awareness, what do we need to do differently to not lean into these things? You say it's possible to change. What are
Yeah.
some of the things people can do even from home now to
Yeah.
build those cognitive functions stronger?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's, when you mentioned your own child, I do want to distinguish somewhat between growth, fixed mindset and fixed brain,
Mhm.
because we don't have to rest on either of them. Both are inaccurate.
Yeah.
We don't have to have a fixed brain, and we don't have to have a fixed mindset. And a fixed brain, these cognitive functions that are weak, these cognitive functions that are responsible for acquiring academic, social, professional skills, absolutely can be improved. And to your point, do take intentional, uh, intentional design, intentional participation, and actually a good amount of work.
Mhm.
And it's possible. We have programs that are running in schools. We have programs running in centers and businesses. Uh, we offer online programs so people can access cognitive programs virtually.
Mm.
So it's definitely possible to shift from a fixed brain to a plastic brain and experience very measurable, meaningful, enduring cognitive change when we apply a neuroplastic process to that.
Mm.
There's also a growth mindset. Carol Dweck's work, I recommend anyone explore it absolutely now, as soon as this podcast comes to an end, because it is very immediate and actionable. Both are actionable, both are possible. And to start to shift your own growth mindset, I wouldn't say it's any easier, but you can start to do it today in your own mind, even by adding the word yet to
Mm.
conversation you had with your child about reading the room yet. Let's dissect this room together. Let's have a chat on the drive home from that party about what you saw and what you understood, or what you didn't see and what you misunderstood. And let's talk about what we might do differently next time. And to add yet to and your entrepreneurial audience, same idea. Yet. This growth mindset, this not that we can't, but we can't yet.
Mm.
So and I think this is actually in many ways in an entrepreneurial spirit. That is the entrepreneurial spirit, right? It doesn't
Yeah.
exist yet. I'm going to build it. I haven't done this yet. I'm going to put blood, sweat, and tears to achieve it. So to some extent, I think your audience has a growth mindset, and make sure that you have it in every aspect of your life, and make sure that you are sharing it with your kids and your peers and your family, because it is not built into us systemically or even, predetermined. That
Mhm.
idea of a challenge is an opportunity. The focus on effort instead of talent. The focus on failure actually being learning.
Yeah.
Failure is learning. It's part of the mastery process. Effort is critical to that mastery. That
Mm.
self-belief is critical to overcoming limitations. That continuous learning and growth, that loop is critical. It's built into all of our neuroplastic exercises. Uh, and it can be, as you say, very practical exercise, personal exercise that we can apply to our everyday experience. Not
Mm.
if not now, just not yet.
Yeah. Well, that's hopeful. That feels good, right? Like, and I love that there's an immediate action we can do Thank you for the recommendation. We'll link to her work in the show notes as well. Is there a particular book, or is there just kind of one core thing that she has written?
I would say just her first book for sure, but anything that there's a whole dedicated website. It's been positive, I would say, in terms of getting traction and building. She's actually got a TED Talk that's a really easy view or inspiring view. It's called Mindset.
Okay.
But that's her book. But in terms of TED Talk, if I could recommend kind of a side to side TED Talk, one being Carol Dweck, who Dweck is Dweck, who talks about mindset in her TED Talk. The other is the founder of my work, of our organization, which is Barbara Aerosmith Young, and her TED Talk speaks about the again, more intentional design of applying a cognitive program to actually targeting and addressing the very cognitive functions that are causing struggle in learning, causing pain and struggle and frustration in learning. So I would love your audience to see those as kind of bookends to our chat today.
Okay. I love it. And maybe we just need to have you on again, because you said there's a whole other podcast here and a whole other podcast there. I need to keep you in our ecosphere, because this is such a powerful conversation and topic. Just to finish out, can you in a few minutes explain a little more of your theory on why there's a cognitive profile for entrepreneurs? Like, just for funsies to kind of understand and evaluate, like, what's contributed to this desire to go do something differently based on maybe how we were educated?
I think entrepreneurs lean into their strengths, and their strengths tend to be creativity and ambition and drive. And they are leaning into those strengths in many cases because some of the traditional or conventional skills that are measured and expected in academic and professional environments aren't there. Things like time management, prioritization, decision-making, sometimes sustained attention, sometimes social intelligence, risk assessment, and even core aspects of numeracy and literacy, that things like making informed financial decisions, cash flow management, all of these actually aspects of running a business that can be quite challenging. Impulse control. I think there is this push and pull between some of these strengths that are being harnessed and leaned into because the conventional or traditional systems of success, and I've got big air quotes about that. What does it mean to be successful? But that's where I see a bit of a push and pull there.
That makes sense, 100%. And it makes sense too why, like, the natural inclination for me as I became an entrepreneur was to want to homeschool my kids too, so they didn't have to go through the same system that I felt like had really held me back in using my gifts. Because it's like entrepreneurship was this breath of fresh air of, you mean I can do this how I want? I actually get to lean into what I love, and I don't have to feel like I'm failing at that. Because in school, it was like, I know I'm intelligent and very smart, but I'm just not quite like, so it totally affected my confidence in the way I viewed myself going through the system that was the way that it is, that didn't really give way for me to own the strengths that I had that didn't fit into that. And I love to talk about this, my report card saying like chat's too much in class, and now being able to say, I literally get paid to talk to people. So take that, third grade teacher. I appreciate that insight too. And everything you've shared today has been so incredibly valuable. I think it gives us this permission and this boost to recognize that because we're changeable, because we can adapt, because we can grow, applying this scientifically to the brain. And I hate to differentiate and say it's just science. Like, this is just reality. This is human behavior. This is the world we live in. This is who we are. Can bring the woo woo in with that and everything. It's just recognizing our
Oh,
ability to change the mindset and
absolutely.
change the brain
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
so empowering.
Thank you for saying that. And I mean, this is cold clinical science. I think that that's where there's fixed mindset and fixed brain, and both are limiting and unnecessary and have been proven scientifically to be, redundant, to be false.
Mhm.
So you can woo woo with the best of them, but I mean, even mindfulness, for example, that's been, again, maybe a little bit, I know we're conscious of time, but uh, they have looked at the brains of Buddhist monks, for example, that obviously mindfulness is their, really how they breathe in space. Their brains are different. Their brains are
Mm.
wired differently. So you can absolutely look at cold clinical science to show, to prove, and to recognize that the brain is constantly moving. It is, we are why that is learning. Our brains are being changed every single day. And again, kind of for better, for worse. And it's up to
Yeah.
us. Do we want to
Mhm.
harness our brain's capacity to improve? Or do we want to be complacent and passive and shrug and have um, our scrolling become what what changes our brain? Because it's going to happen anyway, and
Yeah.
it's
Mm.
up to us.
Very good insight. I think we all need to check ourselves a little bit more, and it can feel really daunting to make that adjustment. And I know even for myself, as I've been diving into the world of AI and learning some of the things I have from these incredible guests we have, I can almost feel like this itch in my brain that's just like, oh, I'm starting to just go crazy a little bit. And I want to be really aware of that and recognize like I'm altering my brain chemistry by continuing to engage like this. I had the thought yesterday, like, I have to go touch dirt. Like I have to get out in the world and take
Yes,
care of myself and not let
yes,
my brain become so
yes,
hyper focused on the
yes,
consumption. And I
yes.
have to create all these things. I have loved this conversation. Like you said, conscious of time. I could go on for another like 3 hours with you, and maybe we'll just have you back on to go deeper into one of these subjects because it's a great
Absolutely
conversation.
happens.
Really important. Thank you so much, Tara, for coming on and all of the wisdom you've shared with us. What a life changing episode.
Absolute joy, and I'd love to stay connected. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you.